Hey there, Randal Schwartz back again with another tip or trick about Dart or Flutter on my Dart and Flutter YouTube channel. So I have an interesting project to demonstrate today. It's going to take a little bit longer than my normal videos because we're going to walk all the way through the code of an entire program, which I rarely do on this show. But here's the game. So there was a discussion by Andrea, who I'll link to in the show notes, about how to transition from using a RiverPod ProviderContainer and then transition into a ProviderScope so that in main you can initialize various providers like a stream provider or a future provider, and yet have that done before you're actually launched with the application, your Flutter application on the screen. And I thought, oh, that was clever. I hadn't seen that exactly in that way before, so I thought I'm going to borrow that. And then I thought, oh, I can combine that with the one I did a few weeks ago about calling run app twice within main, so that you can have some sort of animation to keep the user occupied for a second or two while initialization was happening. So the task I've chosen to do this for is I am going to have a Chuck Norris quote, a random Chuck Norris quote every time I start the, or every time I click on the app and every time I start the app. Notice up here it says tap to refresh. It might be a little small on your screen, sorry. But the main stuff is there. I will apologize in advance. These are randomly selected Chuck Norris quotes, and some of them may have words that are offensive. I'll try to click quickly if I see something like that. This already might be a little edgy. But anyway, so I'll click on it. Now, notice the three dots down at the bottom. That is an artificially induced delay so that we can see the time that it's taking to go talk to the API and come back. It's 3 seconds faster than that, and you wouldn't notice the time at all, but I have that added in, and I'll even show how I'm getting those three dots as well. So again, every time I click, I get a different Chuck Norris quote. But the important thing to notice is that at application startup, and you have to watch for this carefully here, at application startup I have a spinner, and this is the animation that came from let's click away from that one. That came from invoking the circular spinner in my in a run app at the beginning of main. I'm going to walk through all this code in a few minutes. I just wanted to demo what it looks like when it's running first, so that we'd have opportunities to do that. So let's go over to the code here. I'm going to be pulling in the Chuck Norris API, and I'm going to apologize in advance if too many of you go out and actually use this free resource. It may go away. So I just happened to stumble across this one day. I really like it. They do say, yeah, it's okay to go ahead and hit that, but please be respectful. Don't be slamming these over and over again, which is part of why I have a 3-second delay here. So let's walk through the code fairly quickly here. I'm pulling in convert for JSON decode. I'm pulling in log for logs so that I get these nice logs down here in the bottom. I'm also pulling in Flutter RiverPod because I'm going to be building this quote by calling a RiverPod API that's going to be calling the Chuck Norris endpoint, which is in fact what we're starting to do right here. I'm setting up a client, HTTP client as a provider, just simply with a building message so I know every time that it's rebuilding that, and then returning http.client. So this is the HTTP package, not the HTTP built-in, because I want the features that it has. You can provide, when you make a request, a list of categories. There's the list of categories. Nice. And then this is the base API Chuck Norris IO, joke/random. We create a random number generator here. Yes, you can use random dot everywhere you want, or random parens dot everywhere you want, but this is the more official way of doing that. And then we have our actual get the quote. It's a feature provider. It returns a string. We're logging get check provider. You'll see that down here in the log messages. And then again, just for demonstration purposes, I have this. I'm delaying for 3 seconds. Just to show if the API took 3 seconds long, where would I be seeing my spinners and stuff. Then I'm going to get the client provider from up in the earlier provider that I showed. That is an HTTP client. I think if I hover, it'll show that. Yes, HTTP client. And then I get a random category. This is category sublength with next int on random. That's kind of the shortest way to do that. I am surprised there's not a built-in for that. There isn't even one in package collection. I tried. There's one called pick, which allows you to select of a bunch of them, but not. It's too inefficient for what I want to do. I just want one random category. Print the category down there. You see here I picked religion and I picked sport as random categories. And then get the URL by doing a Chuck API URL with .replace, which is going to create a category and the actual category value in the parameters. And this is the proper way to build up a URI. Please, please stop building up URIs by string concatenation. You will get it wrong someday. You may get it wrong the first time you try it. Just don't do that. Always go back and look at the .replace protocol on URIs to be able to build up an actual URI from real Dart values. Okay, so that then is being handed to a get call. Get, of course, goes out to the net, picks up that particular URL. We get the data back as response body. We do a JSON decode on it. Now, we're expecting the value to come back as being decoded as a map of keys of string, and values are both lists and strings, and it's just a mess. So I just say dynamic for this. I hate APIs now that have sort of a mixed second level just because of that. And of course, it makes no difference to JSON, but it does make a difference to Dart. But if that is a string dynamic, then we're going to return data value as string. And this could trip up all sorts of ways. One, I might not get a string dynamic. Two, I might not have a data value, in which case this is going to return null. And then as string is going to blow up. Either one of these blowing up is going to throw an exception in this part of the code, which will be caught by the future provider and inserted as an async error. That's exactly what I want to have happen. So I don't have a try catch here. I only have the throwing up stuff. Now, if the value is missing there, it'll go all the way down to here and then throw this. I don't know if I needed this final throw because I think I'm going to die before that, or throw before that. So that, sorry, Perl terminology. So that's that. Okay, so this is a usable module now. It's most of the code is stolen straight from the cookbook example of how to do that. I will tell you right now that I'm using RiverPod 2.0, which I've inserted here with both RiverPod 2 with the dev entry because it's not quite released yet. Remy said any day now. He said September, getting close to the end of September. And I'm also doing the same thing with Flutter RiverPod. So I'm actually using 2.0. You'll see why I need to use that in a minute because I am using some of the API from 2.0 already. Now let's go back to our main code. Let's take a look at what I've got in there. So main here is again the pattern that I showed before, and I'll put this show link in the show notes, or maybe I'll put it up on screen right now. Maybe if you look up on screen, you'll see an actual link to this particular video from earlier in my stream. So it's going to do a circular progress indicator, spinning. This was that sort of beginning spinner that we saw before. And then here's the stuff that's going to take some time, but we want to initialize while we have that initial animation up on the screen. So we're going to do this a little differently from the way you normally do a RiverPod thing, in that we're going to create a provider container. A provider container is similar to a ProviderScope in that it holds all of our details for our various RiverPod providers. However, it's doing it sort of at the Dart level, not at the Flutter level yet, which is how we're able to get away with this. The next step is that we're going to read the Chuck provider future. Now, the future that comes back will not complete until we've had the 3 seconds pass by and we have a valid quote in our targets. So this await will automatically cause Chuck provider to go out and basically preload, basically do what it needs to do. Now, the next step, and this is the magic step, this is the step that Andrea demonstrated in his blog post, which again I've linked to in the show notes, is to use an uncontrolled provider scope. I hadn't seen this before, but I pass it in the container I already have. That means it gets to bring forward all of the things that have been initialized in that container while I was still running that first circular progress indicator. And then, of course, I drop down into my app as the child. So it's sort of like just a provider scope, but it's able to accept a container parameter to take existing state and move that forward into the provider scope. The rest of this is all fairly normal stuff. I won't describe this too much. You can go ahead and look at the Git repo. Yes, I actually have a Git repo for this one. Again, linked in the show notes. Okay, so there's my home page. We're going to basically set up a scaffold with the light blue background. We're going to have the tap detector, so that is a gesture detector that is opaque, which means I can click anywhere on the screen and it still works. In fact, let me try that. I'll demonstrate that. I can click over here, and I can click down here, and I don't have to click on just the center part, which is how it was before until I figured out about this hit area. Okay, now this is the fun part. Ref refresh. So what this does is it tells Get Chuck Provider, if I click Get Chuck Provider, you're reset as if you're brand new again. It doesn't actually do a new fetch. The new fetch happens later if somebody is asking for that again. So it basically only resets it back to the beginning, and this is the recommended stuff for the new RiverPod 2 to be able to refresh that there. Then I've got some layout stuff, fractionally sized box, column stuff. There's my tap to refresh message. And here is the middle part. Here's where the quote is. Now I'm using, this is a async value, this quote. Why is it not popping up in my hover here? There it is, async value, and it's a string. So that I'm using .when with, which gives me 3 parts. Gives me data, error, and loading automatically as 3 callbacks. The first callback is data, and here is where I'm printing the actual message. And for that, I am seeing if the message needs to have the ... in it, which is whenever is refreshing. So async value has a new parameter called is refreshing, and that's always true when the value is in the middle of a refresh state. So we're going to see that there, okay? And then, and that's true, I think, if either it's refreshing or it's the initial loading, one way or the other. I think it even says that. Oh, no, only if we go back from data or an error. Otherwise, the data just stays there. But now we're going to dump out whatever data we have, the string part of the data, and ... if needed. So this is what has the message there most of the time, but then the ... just while it's refreshing. Kind of slick there. And of course, if we get an error, or if we have that initial loading. Now we don't see this initial loading, and that's because we're actually loading this up in the before the final run app. We're uploading this, or we're preloading this in our load. So this never shows up. If I took out that other refresh, this would have had a chance to actually show the loading screen down here, the little circular indicator, but we're not going to see that at this point. Okay, and then I have some attributes at the bottom. Even shows my GitHub there as well for this particular code. And I also have uploaded this to Firebase hosting, so you can actually run this directly. Again, link in the show notes. So that's all the code that there is. That is what is doing this. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you came away with a couple of new things. Again, the bottom line here is that I'm calling run app twice, just like I did in that previous message in my stream. I'm calling run app twice, once to start the spinner, doing my heavy lifting while the spinner is running already. And now I'm transitioning to a real ProviderScope so that I can call things. I don't think I pointed that out, so let's call that out. I'm calling RefWatch inside my consumer widget here so that I can get access to the value of the resulting string and also be notified when it's updating. Hope you enjoyed this. Click on like and all that stuff, upvote. Tell your friends, subscribe to this. Hope you enjoyed. And this is Randal out for the day.